In the heart of Kumasi stands a symbol of heritage, authority, and pride. Manhyia Palace is more than a residence. It is the spiritual and cultural seat of the Ashanti Kingdom. For generations, this palace has preserved the customs, history, and leadership of the Ashanti people. Join us as we explore the legacy, culture, and enduring spirit of Manhyia Palace. My name is Edmond Opoku, and I am the host of Culture Convo. Make sure you like, subscribe, share, and leave a comment.
And I'm here with Teacher Kantanka, aka Teacher Sarfo Kantanka. He's a pedagogist, monarchical historian at Manhyia Palace. Welcome once again, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are here today and we want to know the origins of the Ashanti Kingdom.
Many are those that have heard of the Kingdom of Ashanti or the Ashanti Kingdom. When we talk of a kingdom, we are talking of nations that have come together. And it's not one nation, it's not two nations. The case of Ashanti in the olden days is stretched from as far as to Burkina Faso border and to the middle of Ivory Coast and part of Togoland. So vast as the land is, nobody would tell you that it is or it was a kingdom and still a kingdom. It is still a kingdom, except that it's been reduced to a certain size compared to the olden days size. Now it was reduced by the action of the Europeans, and that is the Berlin Conference of 1884 decided to share Africa among themselves. That is the beginning of the partitioning of Africa. It is for that reason that the size diminished to what we find today. And what we find today is a region within Ghana. So Ashanti is now a region within Ghana and stretches beyond other regions, but not as large as it used to be in the olden days. So that makes it a kingdom. Among the other groups, they are paramountcies. A paramount state is not necessarily a kingdom, but smaller than a kingdom, but has all the ingredients of a kingdom. And Ashanti has as many as 70 states, paramountcies. And Ashanti again is a federal kingdom because each paramountcy, as a matter of fact, ought to be described as a kingdom. So kingdoms coming together is a greater kingdom. And that is what Ashanti is. Some of the states of the kingdoms are smaller, others are bigger. Bigger, and the biggest is. Yes. So all have come together, all have agreed to come together to call themselves Ashanti. The name Ashanti is in the local language of the Twi-speaking people called Ashanti. That is the etymology of the word Ashanti. Asa-nti. Asa is war. Asa is wars. Nti is because of. So they came together because of war, in order to be strong enough to defend themselves. So they came together and gave themselves the name Ashanti. Before then, the nations that came together were originally in their smaller states under one strong nation called Denchira.
Okay.
Yeah, so they were under independently.
Bigger then.
So they were independently, as independent states, scattered all over, were under the kingdom of Denchira. And they were not well treated. That means the Denchiras were making them pay more than they could pay. That is, again, they were selling them into slavery. Denchiras were collaborating with the Dutch, that is Holland, to sell people into slavery and to exploit the smaller groups. For which reason the idea came that they should come together and fight for their independence. So they first came together originally with 5 major states: close to each other and close to one another. And then when they agreed to come together, at the very beginning, there were about 5 states. When they came together, they worked out a plan to get all the neighboring states to come to join them, which they did. So they fought for their independence from danger. And then from there, they started wars of expansion, bringing every nation that was closer to them to the fold.
Okay.
Right. But before they became a nation as big enough to go to war against danger, they started, the one who initiated the plan was, that was one state called Kwamai, which is now known as Kumasi.
Oh, so where we are right now?
Yes. So Kwamai was the state. And then lobbied the other states like Gabin, Mampong, Kukufu, Ekwai, Sumnya, and Suta. These were the pioneer states that came together. And so they fought a war against the Dangerous people. The war lasted for almost a year.
Wow.
And they were very successful. And then after that, they started bringing other people together. For a nation to stand, they made 77 laws to start with as the constitution of the Ashanti Kingdom.
Ashanti.
Yeah.
Wow.
Some of the aspects of the constitution were that no one should trace the origin of the other. Everybody coming from wherever you're coming from is a member of the Ashanti Kingdom.
No discrimination.
No discrimination. As long as you have agreed that you
want to be part of
the Ashanti Kingdom, you were an independent state of your own, except that it is a federal state, and therefore, after everything within your kingdom, you also swear an oath of allegiance in Kumasi to tell the world that you are now part of the Ashanti Kingdom.
Wow.
So it remains, even today, that is how it is. So all the nations that have come together to call themselves Ashanti Kingdom have their own rules and regulations, that is their local rules and regulations. Then after that, they have the national one, that is the Ashanti one.
The 77
77 laws of which they have to obey. One of the laws is that at the end of every year, all the nation states would have to come to assemble within the capital of Kumasi. And then every year they have to come together and then assess the pros and cons and how hard they have worked, their weaknesses, their achievements and all that. That is within every year.
Okay.
Now, failure to comply to that order was subject to punishment. And the punishment was that if you were summoned to the capital to defend yourself, and if you fail to come, they wage war against you.
Oh, yes, so now if you fail to attend to this meeting, you will be excluded.
You will not be excluded. You'll be beaten up and forced to
come the next time. So what is the name of this meeting?
Well, that is Ashanti Manhyia.
Okay.
The yearly meeting of the Ashanti. Okay. Before they went to war, the nation was a confederacy. By a confederacy, the Ashanti Confederate States. Confederacy means we are putting ourselves together for a particular aim, for an objective. After the aim and objective is achieved, you can decide to break apart. But after achieving their independence, they decided, let's all come together as a federal state this time. And a federal state means you cannot break away. They all agreed. And when they had agreed, they decided that we should get a capital for the kingdom. Okay. We should also get rules and regulations, law and order. Everything was established, which presupposes that they are now a kingdom. A country.
Yes, that was what I was about to ask, because they have everything.
Yeah, they have everything. Yeah. They have a capital, They have a yearly assembly. They have also sworn oath of allegiance every year, renew their allegiance, that they will not break away. They also agree that anytime any part of the nation or any of the states is attacked, all of them would team up to fight the enemy. That is what we have in Europe today. That is the European Union. They are saying that, okay, the European Union says, if you attack one, you attack all. That was the same in the Kingdom of Ashanti.
Okay.
So they became very strong, and they established an army, a very strong army, though not a standing army, but everybody was a soldier.
Okay.
Every male within the Ashanti
how was that? How were they able to? And then I met me a canetry, and then I one day I could do the share. My say. She said they were
it is a entity. Omotiti ya wo ya wotum nti ya betete ama wo hu say wo koma o mai. That is that. So patriotism was order of the day. Everybody was brought up to be patriotic and defend the kingdom. They did it for a very long time. Ashanti, as a matter of fact, is as old as almost 400 years old. But before the 400 years old of the establishment of Ashanti, they were nations on their own. That is to say, they had lived earlier. All the nations that came together were living on their own. So if you want to know maybe the oldest, you can talk about 600 years, 800 years before coming together. So those states that came together were actually the Akan states. In Ghana, we have different ethnic groups. We have the Akan, the Greater Akan ethnic group, of which Ashanti is a part. Then we have the northern group made up of very many smaller ethnic groups, or what they call tribes. Then we have the Volta region, where it's made up of the Ewe community. So we have the Ewe community, we have the Ga community. The Ga is where the Ghana capital is, Accra, and its environs. Then we have the Akan, the greater portion of Ghana population, the greater portion of the population is the Akan. They speak Twi language, and that is why Ashanti speaks Twi, because Ashanti is the greater part. They form the greater part of the Akan community.
Okay.
So these are the major ethnic groups that we have in Ghana today. We also have the Akans in Ivory Coast. Because, yes.
Wow.
Akans in Ivory Coast form about 42% of the whole Ivorian population.
So like Ivory Coast, almost half of Ivory Coast is
Akan. Then when you come together, it's about 58% of Ghana's population. So this is what we have. Now, Ashanti is well known for its military strength. Whilst many nations felt that they should be part of the European control, Ashanti decided never to be part of the European control.
Wow.
So they fought the Europeans for their freedom, or they resisted colonialism or colonization for well over 100 years. In all these cases, they were fighting seriously with the British. It is believed that they fought about 7 major wars with the British. As for the smaller ones, we don't count. But the major wars, 7 major wars, the Ashantis have won 3 and the British 4. This has put them on the world map for resisting colonialism.
If I may ask, when we learned about colonialism, and what I realized was that whilst the British and the other European countries came into Africa and Ghana, to be precise, they started by trading with most of the nationals. And how did it come about that Ashantis never wanted to barge in and trade with them?
Well,
but they wanted to resist.
Well, they were trading.
Okay.
And the fact that they were trading with the Europeans did not mean they will serve or they will kowtow to the European dictates.
Okay.
That is what they didn't want. We will trade with you, but you are not our masters.
Okay.
This is what Ashanti stood for. One would have heard of the Golden Stool. It plays a major role in the day-to-day life of the Ashanti Kingdom. Yes, after the War of Independence, when they had their freedom, then they decided to form a federation. The earlier union was a confederacy. So they wanted to turn the confederacy into a federation, which means one capital, one head of states. And they asked themselves, okay, if we are going to be one with one head, then who is going to be the head?
It's a tough one.
Yeah, so the plan sat down, debated and debated and debated, and came up with a solution, which was more religious. That is, we pray to the Almighty God to send something from the skies to come and sit on the lap of one of the chiefs.
That's powerful.
Mm-hmm. So whoever receives that something on his lap becomes the head.
The head.
And they all agreed. So that is the coming of the Golden Stool. They prayed to the Almighty God, and then with the help of Okomfanochi, that is the chief priest of the Ashanti Kingdom.
That is one significant person.
Yes. And the chief on whose lap the Golden Stool fell was the chief of Kwamai, or the paramount chief of Kwamai, which became Kumasi. So he became the leader. That is Osei Tutu the first. Then they had now got their leader. They needed a capital. So how did they get a capital? Then they decided that, okay, still pray out to the Almighty God to give us direction. So the direction came, and they were asked to plant a particular tree called the Kum tree in two of the nations that had come together. That is the Kwamai state and the Kumawu state. Kumawu was not called Kumawu, it was called Bankaso Apemso.
Bankaso Apemso.
Or Apemso Bankaso. So they planted one there. And they planted one at Kwamai, which is now Kumasi. So Kwamai became Kumasi. The tree planted was called Kum tree. And they said the one that flourishes becomes the capital. The one that dies, or the one that withers, will not become the capital. Since the Kwamai one flourished, Kwamai became the capital of the kingdom. And therefore the name was changed from Kwamai to Kumasi. The Kum tree under the Kum tree. The one that withered became Kumawu. The Kum tree had died. So the name was also changed from Kumawu to
Bankaso.
from Bankaso, Apemso to Kumawu.
If I may ask, why these two particular cities?
Well, they were almost always directed by their leaders.
Oh,
that is the priests, the high priests.
Okomfanochi.
Yeah, always directed them. And from Okomfanochi, they believed strongly that the information came from the Almighty God through him. So they accepted everything. Now, whilst many people believe that the Golden Stool came before they went to the War of Independence, but it's the other way around. It's after the War of Independence that they decided to come together as a federal state. So
the War of Independence, as in the War of Independence from the Dencha.
The Dencha, okay. Yes, that's the case. So before going for the War of Independence or going to fight for their independence, It was a very serious war, so they had to prepare physically and spiritually. So the spiritual side of the preparation was that they needed human beings to voluntarily hand over themselves for sacrifice.
Wow.
So they had Kumawu, the leader of Kumawu called Trobo Akodia, who agreed to sacrifice himself. Then they had the leader of Mampong, Bwahianantio, also agreed to sacrifice himself. They had the leader of Ajeso, also agreed
How patriotic.
to sacrifice himself. That is, and they had one from within Kumasi also agreed to sacrifice himself. The sacrificial thing or the sacrifice was not an easy sacrifice. Ajuso Odikopim, that was the one who sacrificed himself, was hacked, was butchered, and the flesh thrown all over the place. Then Kumawu's way of dying was, or sacrifice, was that he would lead a section of the war, but would not fire any shots. Would just allow the enemies to fire at him. So he would be the first casualty of the war. Then we have Mampong, who also agreed to lead the war, fight till Sussex. But soon after the success, 1 week later, he would die. He also agreed.
How was he going to die?
He died out of the bullet wounds from the war front.
Okay.
This is how
It
he
was
died.
something spiritual that was already prophesied.
Then the other was also buried on the ground, alive,
Wow.
with his two hands pointing to the sky, and then something concoction was made, put inside a pot and carried in his hands. This concoction was bathed by the leaders of the army who went to the war. So this is how he also died. This is how they sacrificed them, for which reason they won the war physically and spiritually.
Wow. So you've mentioned the name of all these people that sacrificed themselves. And so what was the name of the one that got buried? And
Yeah, that's the chief of Dumakase Kese, called Asensokof.
wow. Wow. How were they able to sacrifice themselves? That tells how
That is patriotism,
Wow.
love of nation,
And
discipline.
Wow. I feel like till today you can see it in the Ashantis.
Yes, that is so.
Wow. So it brings us to the political structure. You've talked about the political structure. And so what was the name of the leader of the Ashantis then?
That is King Osetutu the
Osetutu.
First, of Pimswo, is given the accolades or the appellation of Pimswo, Osetutu.
So he also went to the war.
No, the war was led by Mampoyene,
Oh, okay.
because he had sacrificed himself to die after receiving bullet wounds.
Oh,
So
okay.
if Asante Osetutu had led the war, that means he was to die.
So this war was for the unity of the Ashantis.
Yeah.
And who did they fight against?
Yeah, they fought against Denchira.
The Intra,
Okay, and again, when the Golden Stool came, they all agreed to bring down their office symbol. And office symbol, official symbols of the Ashantis are stools, blackened stools or black stools. Now, when a chief dies in office, a stool he loved most is consecrated and blackened and kept in the name of that chief. So they asked that everybody should bring that symbol. They brought it together. It was burnt into ashes, and they made it into concoction and drank. Yeah, yeah. So this is what kept them together.
Wow. And what about Okomfo? Can you tell us a bit about him as well?
Well, Okomfo, before the establishment of the Ashanti Kingdom, was born and brought up at Ukugwa in the eastern region. Because it's now called Akuapem. All right. In those days, there was another powerful state apart from Denjira called Akwamu. And Akwamu is where Osei Tutu was taking refuge. Because Osei Tutu, before he became the Ashanti king, or the Kumasi paramount chief, was serving at Denjira as a servant to the king of Denjira. Over there, something occurred. Historians are not very sure of what happened, but a lot of stories are told about why he left the place. So he left there, came home, and then they had to go and hide him because it amounted to a criminal offense.
Because he had left where he was supposed to serve.
Yes. So he was sent to Akwamu, where he met Okomfo. Because Ukugwa, which is now part of the Akuapem state, was part of Akwamu Kingdom. So Osei Tutu and Okomfo were all together at Akwamu when message came that the one occupying the seat of Kwamai, which became Kumasi, had passed on them. So they needed a replacement. And he was also a royal of that place. So when he was coming, he came together with his friends, Okomfo. This is how he brought over. The Akwamu king also gave him about as many as 1,000 or more soldiers to come and help him in his establishment of his new states.
Okay.
So the group that he brought came from Akwamu, so he stationed them at Asafo.
Okay.
He stationed them at Asafo. He added them to Asafo community. And then a place called Asafo, and then that group led by the king or the chief of Asafo became Akwamu. So this is how we had Akwamu. Another group came from Akwamu, but they also had their name. That is Edum.
Edum.
Yeah. It is now called Edum, but they were coming from a place called Anum.
And they changed to Edum.
So with time, they changed to Edum. So they also became another force, military force that had to guide the king and the queen.
So you talked about when the chiefs and the stools. So when we come to manhyia, we see a lot of symbols, regalias, like the stools, the kente. How does all this symbolizes the Ashanti?
Well, they became a nation and therefore had to protect some of the things that they needed. So they had to establish industries. Anytime they went to war and noticed that there were people who had learned crafts, handicraft, they brought them together and settled them at special places. So the weaving, people were already weaving kente, and they brought other people from war zones, or they captured, add them up. So that was Bonyure was set up for producing
of the weavers.
Yeah. And then Ehya was set up to produce stools, chairs, and anything made of wood. Then they had a Krofrom.
Okay.
Yeah, that is also goldsmith. They had to produce. So everything that they needed, a place was identified, and then a factory of that thing they needed was set up there.
Okay. So can you take us back to when the Europeans came and the encounter? Can you take us a bit through the wars and how long it lasted?
Well, the Europeans came, settled at the coast. They began trading with the people at the coast. So trading spread to various parts of the community, a greater community. So Ashantis were also...
When you say trading, what was the...
The trading was gold, trading in slaves,
Oh, okay.
trading in cola nuts, trading in rubber, and other things. Before the Ashanti Kingdom was established, these things were what the Europeans were trading in.
So it already existed. It wasn't like the Ashantis were the pioneers of, because the word that I heard was that the Ashantis were the pioneers when it comes to the trading of slaves.
Well, that was another tool of divide and rule.
No.
Okay, Ashanti was very powerful at the later stages, so they had to play all the other states against Ashanti. And then they have to make everybody believe that Ashantis are not good people.
Okay.
So if you are trading in slaves, you are not a good person. And even the black Africans in the diaspora, they still want them to feel that Ashantis are their enemies.
Exactly.
But that is not the case. Ashantis themselves were sold into slavery for many, many years before they had their independence.
Oh.
Okay, they had their independence in 1701.
Okay.
Slavery began on the coast of this part of the world, that is Ghana, Nigeria, Togo, and other places, as far back as 14 something.
Wow, that's
there was no Ashanti
before,
then.
Yeah.
So 14, 15, 16, 17. 300 years of trading in slaves before the Ashantis had their independence, of which nobody could sell them into slavery. People had sold them for 300 years.
Wow. Wow.
Okay, so why do you make them the champions of
the slave trade?
The slave trade. Well, when they came into the slave trade, one is not saying that they didn't take part in the slave trade. Because when they became a power within the region, they also took part in the slave trade, but for how long? They had sold slaves for more than 300
years before
they came in, and in less than 100 years, slavery was abolished.
Oh, I see.
Again, Ashanti died in their numbers at war. So they decided to even keep the population rising by bringing in every neighbor that was willing to join them. So they were not ready to sell people into slavery, except that people who were rebellious. Okay, people who were rebellious were not bad people, but they were intelligent, hardworking, strong, and they
didn't want to opt in as slaves.
So they didn't contain them. They sold such people. Those who were calm, gentle, and serious, hardworking were contained in the kingdom. So this is...
So I also learned that some other ethnic groups in Ghana also joined forces with the Europeans to fight the Ashantis.
Yes, that's it. The Europeans planted a seed of discord among the Ashanti Kingdom. Any group of ethnic group that decided to secede from the kingdom was supported by the Europeans. They gave them arms, they gave them intelligence, they gave them money, they gave them everything they needed to secede. So that made them take away earlier planned at Berlin. The Berlin Conference of 1884 planned to divide and rule and to partition Africa, to cut Africa into pieces like cake and share. So there were the Europeans, like Belgium, Congo, they took Congo. They had the French that took Ivory Coast, Burkina Faso, and other places. They had the Germans that took Zimbabwe and Togo and other places. they had the English that took the coast of Ghana and other places. So they shared. And then when Ashanti resisted, they had to divide and rule. They divide them, play the others against them as if they were the savior.
Good people.
Yeah, good people. And so this is how many of those, again, anytime the British fought the Ashantis and they defeated the Ashantis, they also carved certain portions of Ashanti and added it to the British territories.
Oh, okay. So after they defeated us, they took some of our
Yes,
people
that's
away
it.
as well.
Because Denchira became part of the Ashanti Kingdom. When Britain defeated Ashanti in 1874, they signed pact with Ashantis to leave Denchira alone, to leave Wasa Seshi, Zima, Achim, Asin, Chifo, many states. They took.
You mentioned that we fought 7 wars against the Europeans, right? Which we won 3 of them. Which was the ones that we won?
Well, there was a major war at the Wasa in Samanko. The war is called the Samanko War. The whole greater portion of the Akan and the Ga, the Ever, the Zima, the Wasa, the Sefi, all went to the side of the British.
Oh.
All right. So, including Denchira. So what happened was the British were defeated. Their war general called Sir Charles McCarthy was brought from Sierra Leone to lead the war. He was a soldier in command of West Africa. So he was stationed at Sierra Leone. He was brought in purposely to lead the war. He was killed by the Ashantis.
Wow.
Yeah.
I heard that they cut off his head.
Yeah, he was decapitated. So that was one of the wars the Ashantis won. The British, 1874, won a war against the Ashantis. The Ashantis, 1806, won the British. They defeated the British. That is a proper language. They defeated the British. So these are some of the instances when they defeated the British.
So why were they so interested in fighting against the Ashantis?
The British again finally defeated the Ashantis in 1826. That is the War of Dodoa, or the War of Katamasu.
Okay.
Occasionally, people want to throw dust into the public eyes by saying it was a small group of Gans or the Gan state that fought the Ashantis and defeated them. But that is not the case, because the war was fought Ashantis on one side and all the Gold Coast, the nations that became the Gold Coast. So that is the Fantis, the Evers, the Gans. The Europeans were the Danes and the Dutch. They provided arms. They were in battlefield. They were directing the wars and all that. So if you reduce the war to a very small
number of people.
Yeah, by saying it was the Gans that fought the Ashantis.
Yeah. So one of the interesting stories I heard was the Yasantua War as well.
Yeah, that was also a war that was a draw, I would say, because the aim of the war was to capture the golden stool from the Ashantis. And the men, after many years of fighting, there was a last war, that was 1896, when the British wanted to fight the Ashantis, and Ashantis was almost destroyed, had shattered into pieces. So they were no more as strong as they were, and the British came with the intention of coming to fight the Ashantis. The Ashantis decided not to fight. So the king of Ashanti, called Prempe I, and the mother, Yechan, who was the queen of Ashanti, all agreed that, okay, let's surrender, let them take us away and leave Ashanti alone. So they exiled them to the Seychelles Island, first to Elmina Castle and then to Sierra Leone. And they did not exile only the king and queen, but they exiled all the most important people. Other powerful chiefs were all taken away, numbering more than 50 were taken away. And then whilst they were away in Elmina, Ashantis were trooping in there to go and see how their king was doing.
Fair.
So the British felt that, no, let's remove him to a far-off place. So they took him to Sierra Leone. Still, the Ashantis were going there.
Wow.
So it is there that they decided that what on earth is making the Ashantis that strong, that united, and people told them that there is one thing that makes them that strong and united, and that's the golden stool. So if you lay hands on the golden stool, the Ashanti Kingdom would dismantle. So the British came with soldiers to demand the golden stool. The men were not ready to fight immediately, because Ashantis do not fight wars immediately. They have to prepare, they have to strategize, they have to actually fortify themselves before going to war. So when it became immediate, the men were not ready. Again, the men were not ready because there were a lot of civil wars, which the king of Ashanti had won, or the queen, led by the queen of the Ashanti Kingdom, won those wars. So if you have won a war against us, then we are not prepared to fight, to defend you, because the British are taking you away. So why do we have to fight? So there was that unwillingness to fight. So Yasantua, Ejuso, Queen Mother, came in and said, no, if the men would not fight, they, the women, would fight. So the women started, and then the men joined later because they felt ashamed to stand by, to stand aloof and look at women fighting. So they also joined. And that war also lasted for more than 6 months. And the British were trapped in a fort they had built. Many died, and they were not able to lay hands on the golden stool. The British brought reinforcement from Nigeria, from Sierra Leone, from Jamaica, from India, to join the Africans to fight the Ashantis. But still, it lasted for a long time. So the Ashantis did not accept that they were defeated. The British, in fact, administratively defeated the Ashantis and then ruled the Ashantis as a separate state from the Gold Coast. They ruled the Ashantis as a crown state of Ashanti. That is it. So this is what happened.
Okay, so talking about Yasanto also tells me the role, how all Ashantis uphold the importance of womanhood in the kingdom.
Yeah, the Ashantis have always upheld the importance of women in their community because we are matrilineal. By matrilineal, we mean we hail from our motherline. So everything belongs to the women. Men are only soldiers and administrators.
Okay, and what role does the Queen Mothers play in the installment of a king?
Well, when a chief or a king is to be installed, it's a Queen Mother who selects among royals. She knows best who is a true royal of the family. So he selects and then gives him out to the other chiefs to vet the selected chief or king. They vet him, and if they found out that he had some criminal tendencies or he has committed some criminal offenses, then they will ask for a change. Then a Queen Mother would again have to change that person. And they have 3 chances to change the person. If he insists that, still maintaining that person, and she loses all the 3 chances, then the elders of the community will decide for him whom to choose. So this is still from the Queen Mother's side.
So how does Ashanti history influence our identity today as we speak?
Well, Ashantis have fought wars upon wars, and the side of wars against the Europeans and resisting the control of the Europeans. So this has made it possible for them to have their name found. Their names are found in every book of history, culture, and tradition. In anthropology, you cannot learn anthropology without mentioning Ashanti. You cannot learn history without mentioning Ashanti. You cannot whatever history that you learn about the colonialism. You mentioned how Ashanti resisted colonialism. So all over the world, they are learning Ashanti come up in history, in tradition, in culture, in everything. So this make people come from long distances to see who the Ashantis are.
And what role does manhyia Palace also play in education and cultural preservation?
When you talk of education, there are two folds of education. There are classroom type of education, and then we have the normal education within the culture and tradition. That is learning through parents. You see, that is also education. Because I want to carve a stool, I learned from my parents, or my father, or grandfather, or my uncle, right? If I want to make earthenware pot or utensils, usually by women, they learn from their mothers. Cooking by the women, they learn from their mother. This is all form of education. Informal, they call it. Informal education.
Wow.
But the formal education was brought in by the Europeans.
Okay. And also, what challenges exist in preserving history in modern day? How is the teaching the young ones about the history? What are some of the challenges about that?
Premium is not praised on history in Ghana. It is more of Ashanti. And the fact that Ashantis have played other tribes or other ethnic groups against Ashanti makes it difficult for them to accept learning about the Ashantis.
Oh,
so if you learn, they call it social studies. Right. Social studies means very small aspects of history is learned in school. So the Ashanti fighting the Denchira doesn't come in. Ashantis resisting colonialism doesn't come in. So they learn just from independence, 1957 to this day, or the struggle,
living
all those there. So these are the challenges.
And what part of Ashanti history do you think that it has been misunderstood till today?
Well, every history of Ashanti is misunderstood. You mention Ashanti and people are angry.
Wow.
Okay.
Why?
Yes, it is playing other tribes against the Ashantis by the Europeans. And it lasted for a very long time. So it has gone into their heads, their children, their children's children.
Okay.
So this is divide and rule.
Divide and rule. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having time for us.
Okay.
So this brings us to the end of this conversation. And make sure you subscribe, you like, you comment, and share. Thank you.